The story begins in 1899,
when Dr. Alexander Hardison
is teaching mechanics and engineering at the University of Columbia. In one day,
are drowning in thought.
his best friend David Finby. I was going to be late for a date with a lady. Alexander was startled to remember
They both rush back to my house
On the way, Alexander said that the director rejected the proposal.
about the use of solar power. You and David said that.
Your friend's ideas are too radical. Alexander said that.
I want my students dare to dream about what is possible.
Not just content and conservative like everyone else.
He told David to look around and observe. Everybody's wearing black polo hats. Identical. Alexander wished that one day people will throw away those hats
And start asking questions about everything. When you get home,
They met Mrs. Watchett,
Alexander's butler and assistant. She reminded me to change my clothes.
It's full of writing,
David looks at Alexander's crazy inventions.
like a brush,
Brushing teeth.
electricity and city blueprints of the future. David advised Alexander not to waste time with him.
Crazy German.
Einstein there.
Alexander replied that.
Einstein had some very interesting ideas, and I'll support you with all my heart. Not long after, Alexander hurried out of the house to meet a KI woman. About to enter the park,
A woman selling flowers asked him if he wanted to buy flowers.
and Alexander remembered that he had promised to bring the flower.
But immediately,
His attention was attracted by a magical machine.
a car that doesn't need horses. The driver accidentally started it. Unfortunately,
Alexander caught the brakes and stopped it.
the driver appreciated and offered Alexander a ride. Even though I want to accept, Alexander refused.
Because you have more important things to do. And continue into the park. I went to an ice skating rink.
Where the woman you are seeing is calling your name.
Her name is Emma and gently blames you for being late.
Alexander said he came as soon as he could. Emma asked about her flowers.
And Alexander, sorry to forget, explained that you've been distracted.
He asked her for a walk in the park, and she agreed. Emma noticed you were shaking and asked if everything was okay. He replied that life,
It can't be complete without her.
Emma radiates joy, and Alexander said they were meant for each other.
Then proposed to you. He took out a ring of moonstones.
And Emma was very emotional.
Because that's your birthstone.
Say you love it. Just a few seconds later,
A man emerged from the bush.
he pulled out his gun and asked them to give him their wallet and jewelry. When the robber tried to take the ring, Alexander resisted in a struggle.
The gun accidentally exploded and the bullet hit Emma.
Alexander held her in his arms as she slowly died of blood loss. 4 years after the tragedy, Alexander was immersed in work when David visited.
Express your worries about you. Alexander says he understands, but he needs David to leave.
David insisted. I don't want my friend to keep hiding, and asked what you're doing. When David was about to see what was hiding behind the curtains,
Alexander stopped and offered another week.
David, come to dinner.
Then I'll show you.
David agreed and said he'll see you in a week. But when David left, Alexander whispered to himself that another week. This conversation will never even happen.
Then,
We see that Alexander has recalibrated himself. Hold by the clock, pocket beloved gift from Emma.
and go to the machine you built.
I sat in the machine and put a lever in. When you pull the lever towards you, time begins to turn back at breakneck speed. Alexander again appeared at the ice skating rink.
But this time, Emma told me to come early.
She asked about the flowers, but instead of answering, Alexander kissing her makes her happy. I suggest they go into the city, and we both ride the buggy to Biker Street. While walking around, Emma saw the carriage without a horse.
Tell Alexander to look, but you ignore. He said it was just a machine.
Emma immediately realized.
There's something unusual, because I never let it go.
Such wonderful inventions. Alexander assured her that everything was fine.
Tell her to come home and wait for you. Said I'll be back later, but it will seem confusing.
Why don't they meet at the ice rink? Emma didn't understand and was confused. Trust me and agree.
However, before leaving,
She reminded me of the flowers I promised. Alexander went to buy flowers. Surprisingly, the horseless car itself.
start to panic. The horses pulled a cart, and what shouldn't have happened. Emma was killed in front of Alexander,
After a while, Alexander talked to David,
saying that this shouldn't have happened.
because they left the park. When Alexander said, you can go back 1,000 times, and watched Emma die 1,000 ways, David became confused.
Alexander told himself that. I can't find the answer at this point. Then Alexander returned,
The time machine at my house started pushes the lever forward.
and watched time go by at breakneck speed. One day becomes equal to 1 hour. You can see it in a minute. And finally, a year goes by in a matter of seconds. His house disappeared and became a garage. Fashion changes every moment.
The transformed city skyline.
new technology is used and suddenly you're up to 2030. Alexander stopped the time machine, step out and still hesitating.
Observe the surrounding environment.
I finally decided to walk through the city.
Go to the New York Public Library. Here, I met a hologram librarian who introduced himself as Vox 114.
And Alexander found this technology very strange.
Vox said that it's connected to every database on Earth, and asked Alexander what he wanted to know.
Alexander asked, why can't people change the past?
And immediately, science fiction library access librarians.
But Alexander insisted, require access to real scientific literature. And then Fox gave the answer that
You can't change the past, because time travel is impossible, Alexander thought, and say out loud that you've got to go further into the future.
to find the answer, then leave.
You keep moving forward in time, but feel a shake. And stop immediately. By 2037, I see everything destroyed.
And soon a military vehicle showed up.
The soldiers came out and arrested. You said they had to evacuate because the moon was breaking apart.
At that moment, the Earth's crust began to crack.
Alexander was lucky.
Go back to the time machine. But a strong earthquake knocked me unconscious.
As soon as you start the machine, start time accelerates extremely fast and externally. Thousands of years pass every second. The trees grow, the canyon was formed, and even ice ages have come.
Before Alexander woke up,
He stopped the engine and reached Earth 800,000 years later. Next we see Alexander sleeping somewhere, dreaming of Emma and being taken care of by a woman.
I woke up one day. Don't know where you are and put your clothes on. And as I was doing that, I saw a boy start to run away.
Following the child, I suddenly stopped.
In front of a spectacular view of a village.
In the canyon, the boy screams something he doesn't understand, and suddenly people are coming out from all directions.
They all speak a strange language I've never heard.
However, a woman who said she knew the stone language,
And understand him. They start talking, but quickly interrupted by a loud sound.
and everyone's gone.
In the evening, Alexander talks to a woman named Mara and her little brother, Calland. Alexander explained to the curious boy that you come from a very busy place where everyone wears black hats on their heads.
And gave Callan his pocket watch.
When Calland went to bed, Mara explained to me that their parents have left this place.
Alexander said he was sorry to hear that. When you see the moon,
Alexander thought to himself that David was right.
you've gone too far. After a while, he reveals that he is from another time, and everything about you is strange. Mara believes in you. That night, Alexander woke from a nightmare, in which a metalhead screams at me.
Calland woke up from the rain, and Mara explained that everyone's met it.
What Alexander found very strange. The next day, Mara showed Alexander the collection. The stones have inscriptions from the stone language. Alexander then asked the elders where they had gone.
And she said they'd all gone somewhere else.
He asked if she meant they were dead.
But she mysteriously replied, there are better things not to say. She explained they weren't lost in the past, and remember the parents, by making these big wind turbines. Two people walking along the beach, and Mara takes him to the time machine.
I checked and found it works fine. She asked if he could take Calland with him,
If it works.
but when Alexander asked at SAO, I didn't get a clear answer.
Suddenly, strange sounds came out and Mara caught her. They ran screaming that they had to go to Calland. When they returned, Alexander saw everyone panicking.
Strange creatures appear, shot the poison range arrows, and Mara was hit. Alexander pulled the arrow from her shoulder, realized that it has a very unpleasant odor. Creatures rise from the ground and begin to chase people who were shot, drag them to the ground,
Alexander saw that Calland had been shot at by a creature.
chasing the boy.
He ran up and beat the creature to save Calland.
Make it move to chase you.
When it caught up to Alexander, it dodged its attack.
I started to climb on a windmill, but that creature, Leothero, caught you. Both fell to the ground. The creature grabbed his neck and began to choke him, but from somewhere.
Calland appears with a torch to save Alexander,
But right then and there, Mara's scream echoed.
and the creature runs back into the forest. He succeeded in getting her down in the sand. Alexander was in pain and tried to dig sand, but in vain. I asked the people in the village, why don't they resist? I got the answer that
The protesters will be arrested.
first, he asked Colin where they were taken.
The boy said no,
I know, but there's a cave nearby.
with ghosts that can help you,
That night, Calland led Alexander to a cave.
where you see something very familiar.
Suddenly, the voice of Box 114 boomed, and Alexander told Calland there's nothing to worry about.
Box says,
He remembers everyone who ever talked to him. Alexander asked,
what has happened since the last time they met?
the box says,
What used to be one race is now two,
one lives underground and one lives on the ground. Alexander asked,
where people are taken by the underground race
and the box says he had a friend who escaped.
from the eastern forest. If they just follow the breath, they'll find it.
Next, they've reached the skull of their dreams. Alexander told Callan to return to the village, and before leaving, Callan revealed that you've lost the watch.
Pocket in the attack, and the creatures that took it. Alexander wondered why they took it. It wasn't long before Alexander was inside the skull. Go in the underground caves.
And finally, to a large space with these creatures. I found a room with clothes.
And see the ring Mara was wearing.
But when you see these horrible knives and tools,
You stumbled in shock and fall to one place
there are skeletons floating in the water. And then a creature caught me,
and forced him to go down into a closed area.
down to where he found Mara in a cage.
But you seemed completely lifeless. When Alexander turned around, I saw a strange pale man.
A pale man named Molo.
Start telling the story of how one race became two, long before the moon fell from the sky.
Earth. It can no longer sustain human life,
Some people are lucky to stay on the ground,
but the rest have to go underground.
centuries after life on Earth recovered. They can't go back to the sun. So,
They've bred themselves into underground levels, where some people have good eyes and ears.
some have big muscles. Moloch explained that he belonged to a class, has expanded the brain's capacity, and can see,
And control the thoughts of others.
even Alexander's.
He said he controls the underground so that they don't overconsume and run out of food.
Alexander was angry, asked whether the role of humans here is to make food,
And Moloch said yes.
except for those who are fit to reproduce like Mara. Alexander was angry that this is a corruption of all the laws of nature, and Moloch replied furiously.
That your time travel, it's also a corruption of natural law.
Moloch added that Alexander was obsessed with the question. If so, why? Moloch creates an image in the head. Alexander shows off his watch collection
Of your inventions.
and dreams about Emma and about what might have happened. Moloch explained to Alexander that
I built the time machine because Emma died.
if she's alive, it will never exist, and so you can't use a time machine to go back.
And save her, in other words.
You're the inevitable result of that tragedy.
Moloch took out the time machine and said, now that you have the answer.
You should go home. Alexander demanded the watch back. My pocket.
But when Moloch gave it to me, Alexander grabs Moloch's start machine and two.
People started fighting in there. Finally, Moloch fell out of the machine, hanging from Alexander's neck and dying. Because time flies so fast outside. When Alexander stopped the machine in the distant future, I see the underground race. It destroyed all life on Earth.
Next, Alexander goes back to Mara and saves her.
You start the machine,
Lock it with a pocket watch and two people run by. Creatures that are no longer controlled by Molochs. Alexander succeeded in locking them up.
and you two keep running towards the exit. In the last moments,
Alexander was struck by an arrow and marked by its smell.
the creatures began to chase them through the caves.
While climbing close to the ground,
The pocket watch broke and the time machine exploded.
creating a wave of time. Through the underground tunnels,
Everything in its path instantly dies.
or disappear.
You were lucky to get out in time.
Saved by the villagers. From a distant group of people seeing alien time wave radiating through the underground tunnels. Kill all the creatures. Mara said she was sorry about his machine.
And Alexander said no because it's a machine and two people holding hands. In the last scenes,
The box is telling a story for kids.
from his large database of history books,
Alexander is seen pointing to Mara and Callan.
where your house used to be, and describe what it looks like inside.
At a different time,
Wojciech was seen telling David that Alexander has been gone for a week. David said he was glad Alexander was gone.
I hope he found a new home.
David then asked,
Does Mrs. Wojciech want to work for you and your wife?
not until at least Alexander can return, and she gladly accepted. As Mrs. Wojciech was about to leave Alexander's room,
She said the princess blessed.
and finally through the window looking out into the street,
David was seen throwing away his black polo hat.
just what Alexander wanted.